Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's episode 5 of the We're Young But Just Us podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Doctor, like always so far. Today we have on special guest Chris Tsakonas from 88.7 WRSU FM New Brunswick. They are the Rutgers student radio, and they cover all of the live sporting events that Rutgers University hosts. Live, because that's special, I guess. And we talk about his career and how life is working for college radio and his experiences and just his advice regarding people getting into college radio. We also dive into Rutgers men's basketball, coming off of a huge comeback victory against Northwestern. What's it going to take to make the tournament and get a higher seed in the tournament, while also going about the importance of Geo Baker and his contributions to the final win, and, of course, the trapezoid of terror. We also dive into Rutgers football and the return of Greg Schiano. How long is it going to take for him to win? Have the hires and recruits been good so far for what he's capable of? And what are some of the must-win games for 2020 and the expectations for next year? And also some final fun predictions down the line for all of Rutgers sports in this little bit of a shorter podcast talking about all Rutgers everything. So enjoy.
Swing drive, right center field. The Braves have won it. Elliott starts right, cuts it upfield, touchdown Dallas. They score and lead. It's over. Forward for the win. Bam. Got it. And the Scarlet Knights win it. There is pandemonium in Piscataway.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's episode 5 of the We're Young But Just Us podcast for this time around. And I actually forgot to ask how to say his last name. It's, if I say this right, Chris Tsakonas. He's at 88.7 WRSU FM New Brunswick. That's the Rutgers student radio. He's a play-by-play caller. He said he primarily women's basketball, men's basketball, football, and he's also a producer. So how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Kyle. Thanks for having me on.
No problem.
Don't feel bad about it. No one gets that right. No one ever does.
I didn't actually hear you say it. How do you say it?
Tsakonas.
Oh, God, I butchered that. Tsakonas. We'll get it right for the intro. I'll record an intro after this. We'll get that right. All right. So pretty much I found a lot of intrigue in the student radio aspect because I remember – because I did work for Rutgers this summer for the marketing department, and one of my first things was doing a baseball game, and I was seated, I think, right next to the guys at the baseball game, and I'm just curious, how is that life? It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's a great time. You know, you get to go to all these games that everyone, especially with men's basketball, all your friends and everyone are trying to get into the student section. The tickets are sold out, and you just get to go in there, not only get in the game for free, but get to broadcast it on the radio. It's a pretty amazing thing.
And so what's see, right now you're the primary guy for women's basketball, right?
There isn't really a primary guy per se. We kind of just rotate on the calls. I have gotten a lot of women's basketball calls this year. I've got a call against Michigan at home this Sunday, and then next week I'm going out to Northwestern. So
what's it like? So you get to travel. What's that like?
Traveling is probably the most fun part outside of just the actual broadcasting. You normally get like a day or so, day and a half, depending on how the travel arrangements work out, and you get to go to the game. You get like per diem, so like you don't have to worry about being strapped for cash. And yeah, basically you just get to sort of explore all these places. So I've been to college towns like Bloomington, Ann Arbor. Now you could throw College Park in there. I've been to Baton Rouge. Went to South Alabama on a solo trip. Not so sure about that one, but for the most part, it's a pretty fun time.
So how did you get into that? Like, when did you figure that like that was like something you can do? Like, how do you get into that at a school like Rutgers, like student radio? Like, it's just, how do you get into all that?
Well, my first weekend of college, they had a table at the involvement fair, and they basically explained, hey, like, you can come here, you can call games, you can go on road trips, you can interview coaches, interview players, do all that fun stuff. And I was hooked right away. You know, I went to the first meeting, and I've been really involved in it ever since.
All right. So, yes, student radio, we don't have that. So I go to U of L. It's funny, we don't have that. So I'm really not sure how common it is. But it's really cool to see, because I think I saw Northwestern had their own student radio at the baseball game I went to. So that's just pretty cool to get the students involved and do the radio. What would you say, biggest learning experiences? What's the greatest value out of doing that? Just getting the experiences you get, other than just the awesome travel and all that. What's the biggest thing you've got out of it?
Well, the biggest thing I got out of it was, one, figuring out how exactly you go about calling play-by-play on the radio. Because before I got to college, I basically just watched games on TV. So radio is a completely different animal. Your voice is basically the entire picture, whereas when you're watching on TV, the announcers are kind of in the background. You can kind of ignore them if you want. You can't do that with radio. So figuring out how to go about describing the action, making sure the fundamentals of broadcasting are sound, that kind of stuff is not easy, and it takes a lot of reps and it takes a lot of time. I still don't feel like I'm really where I can be or where I need to be, but it's off to a great start, learning how to do all these things, be it play-by-play, doing a nightly sportscast, doing, we have a talk show that runs 2 hours every day, Monday through Friday, getting to do all that stuff and sort of finding my voice has really been the biggest challenge.
And so far, what's your favorite personal calls, if you had to go back and listen to them, at the top of your head? Yeah. Or maybe not.
I'm sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, or maybe favorite calls / favorite games in general.
My favorite call, actually, it's the same one. Favorite call and favorite game had to be men's basketball late January this year against Minnesota. They won that game, I think, 64-56. I did play-by-play for the first half of that game, and Rutgers they got off to a really slow start. They were down 10-2 after the first 4 minutes, and they just went on an unbelievable run. Daniel Turu, one of the best bigs in the Big Ten, he was shut out the entire first half. Rutgers really locked him down, and it was just an unbelievable experience. The building was sold out. The trapezoid of terror, as they call it, it was rocking. It was a sold-out crowd, as per usual nowadays. So, yeah, that was probably the best one. And also, listening back to it, that was the one where I really felt the most comfortable with how I sounded. I felt like I really did what I wanted to do. I mean, there's obviously always room for improvement, but that was the one call where I really listened back. I try to listen back to every single call. The one where I really listened back and said to myself, I think I did pretty good with that.
And so you said the biggest challenges is pretty much you making sure to get it right. And that's do you have is it all student run, or do you have people guiding you to making to improve your calls?
That's a great question. It's almost entirely student run. We have our broadcast administrator, Mike Pavlichko, who is involved with WCTC, a local station. He does high school football there. He hosts a weekly show. He does the Rutgers tailgate show. And he also called a lot of women's basketball back in the day, and he's still sort of involved with different aspects of play-by-play. He's got a ton of experience in the industry. He really does a good job of sort of helping us out. And he thinks about stuff that, as students, we're not broadcast professionals, at least not yet. And he really gets you to think about things that you don't really think about when you're listening back on your own.
So I guess pretty good, cool stuff about student radio right there. I guess the last thing I want to cover about that realm is, if you had to any, I guess, incoming Rutgers student, or just any student across the country in general getting into student radio, what's your biggest advice for them to approach calling game for the first time, or just calling it in general?
I would say my biggest piece of advice is, listen back to every call you have, because that's the only way you're going to get better. I didn't really see myself really start to improve as a broadcaster until I started doing that consistently, and knowing what to look for, like time and score, locating the ball on the court or the field, depending on the sport. Stuff like that is stuff that you really don't really think about improving on until you actually go back and listen to it.
All right. So again, you can check him out. That's WRSU 88.7. I believe the talk show's Nightline, right?
Nightline is
the post game
talk show, and their weekly talk shows at the WRSU crew.
Oh yeah, so that's 88.7. It's really cool. I whenever it was on BTN Student U or BTS Plus, I would catch the games on the WRSU, because I thought, why not support the students? And it's a really interesting experience to listen to them improve their game, and just hearing it from a student's perspective. So speaking of that, we brought up men's basketball. as this is being recorded, the night we just are coming off of an 18-point comeback against Northwestern. Very sluggish start against a team that they probably should have blown out, but maybe not, because apparently they've had huge leads against a lot of teams this year in the Big Ten. Just the morning after, that was crazy. What's your initial reaction morning after?
Well, I mean, if you were following Rutgers Twitter around the under 4 timeout in the first half, you would have thought that the entire season was coming to an end, and with good reason. They're down against a quad 3 team at home almost by 20 points at one point. And, it really comes down to, this was the game where Geo Baker really reasserted himself as the leader on the team. He had been struggling as of late. He was taken out the starting lineup. He had injured his thumb earlier, so he was out for a couple games there. And he finished with 25 points in this game. So it really came down to Geo Baker asserting himself as a leader. A lot of Rutgers fans come in this game and are like, oh, if we don't win this game by 20, that's not good. But I think after all of that, I think the fact that we got the win, even if it was in overtime, that's really the most important thing, is we avoided as bad of a loss as you can get in a Big Ten conference game at home against Northwestern. And now they've got a 7-game stretch where they just need to really, I guess the best way I could describe it is, they really need to just take care of business at home. They really need a road win to really round out their resume. That's the one thing that's really missing. They're undefeated at home, the best home record in the country. Now they just got to get that one road win. They've got a couple opportunities to do that. They've got Ohio State coming up on Wednesday. They're at Wisconsin, which is an area where Rutgers has played relatively well on the road, regardless of how good the team was back then. And they've got a game at a ranked Penn State team, which is going to be very tough. But at the same time, Rutgers has won at the Bryce Jordan Center before, so it's not unthinkable to think that they could do it again. So it's really a case of Rutgers, if they split the last 7 games even heading into the Big Ten tournament, I think they're definitely going to be at least an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament.
I think it's funny, I actually listened into the WRSU yesterday for, I guess, the alumni section, and as the voice in the RU Scoop podcast said, it was must can't lose in terms of Northwestern, of course, making fun of the people that, I guess someone said for it was the Nebraska game where I think the NJ.com writers are saying it's not must win, it's can't lose. I think it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, how it can be one or not the other. So they didn't lose, which was huge. They were down 18. I think that was their biggest comeback since 1996. And this is their just biggest season since, I guess you could say, since 1991 right now, because it's right in front of them to get to the tournament. It's been a while. And so what do you think? Is this the year? Is it just like a major collapse away from them not getting there? Is it just right on the table getting to the tournament for them?
Yeah, I think the only way they don't make the tournament at this point is if they win like one of their last 7 or 2 of their last 6. It really isn't. It's really a very interesting situation for Rutgers, because they're normally in the position where they're well out of the tournament discussion almost since the season begins. And now Rutgers, with that win against Northwestern, they sealed 2 things. 1, they sealed their first winning season in a really long time. And 2, they now have 8 wins in the Big Ten. They're 8-5. Rutgers has never won more than 7 games in a Big Ten conference slate. And that was last year when they went 7-13, and that was considered like Rutgers might be onto something here kind of year. So really, in that respect, it's just a case of Rutgers. Yeah, they're in a position where they haven't been in a really long time. And, the fan base is sort of like, they were kind of tentative. I think some people in the fan base were kind of tentative, like, all right, like, when is Rutgers going to let us down? Because that's always been how the story has gone for Rutgers. But, now it's starting to get a sense of, okay, maybe this is the real deal. Maybe Rutgers is actually going to break the curse. It's been 29 years since they last made the NCAA tournament. So this is a drought that they're really going to want to break.
So though, back to the Northwestern game, would you say like Geo Baker taking over, and even when he took over, you saw him getting open shots, even for Ron Harper to almost win the game. He got a good shot, inbounds play for Yerboa in overtime. Even though it was at home, it felt like they overcame the struggles we've seen on the road where they just couldn't close down the stretch. So you said they're obviously going into a stretch where they're going to have to win some games on the road, and going into Columbus this Wednesday. Do you think just the way they played at the end of the game just shows like a little bit of growth from that game against Maryland, the game against Illinois, Iowa, that maybe they can finish it?
It could. The big difference, though, is that Rutgers only has that one win on the road, and that was at Nebraska. And Nebraska, not an easy place to play by any stretch of the imagination. But it really, like, the Northwestern game was a good confidence builder for Geo Baker and a good confidence builder for this team. But at the same time, they've got to get something going on the road. You can't really go into Selection Sunday with one major road win and, expect to have anything higher than like a 9 or an 8 seed. So I think in terms of taking things away from Northwestern, yes, it was a game where you could take away a lot of positives in terms of how the team battled back from adversity, but they were still in front of a sold-out rack. So until they can really put that together on the road, and they've had some near misses, so they can really put that together on the road, it's a little early to say that they could do that. But by the same token, Rutgers hasn't lost a game by double digits since they lost by 12 at the Izzone back in early December. So this is a team that's always been in the mix to win every game. And you sort of feel watching those games against Iowa, against Illinois, against Maryland, that the game was there for the taking. And if Rutgers plays the way they did in those games, they're going to get that elusive road win at some point.
And it shows how much Geo Baker really is the MVP of the team, because it seems like it was until the Nebraska shot was really good, but it was like he only had one other shot in that game. And ever since he came back from the injury which was after Caldwell, before Nebraska, that he just couldn't get back in the rhythm. But again, it was an injury that people said he was crazy to come back from early, or as crazy to come back as soon as he did. So getting the 25 6 rebounds was just crazy. And that's just going to be something that shows that maybe he's back for the rest of the year, or it's just something we're going to have to see, like maybe on Wednesday, to see if he's truly like consistently back.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about Geo Baker is, people will say Rutgers doesn't have a guy. Like, they don't have like a Cassius Winston. They don't have someone of that caliber. And I'm not saying Geo Baker's as good as Cassius Winston, but whenever Rutgers has found themselves in a close situation, ever since Corey Sanders left the team 2 years ago, Geo Baker has been the one with the ball in his hands. So in terms of looking for a clutch score, Geo Baker is going to be the guy until he leaves Rutgers, whenever that may be. At the same time, the thing about Rutgers is they've got 6 or 7 guys that on any given night could be the guy, but they're never all on their game at the same time. So they're going to be off nights from Geo Baker. He's not the most consistent shooter out there. They're going to be nights when he's really not feeling his shot. Things are a little off. But for Rutgers, the nice thing about that is you can have, Caleb McConnell or Kwasi Aboa or, Ron Harper Jr. Those guys can also step up and fill that role. So I think Geo Baker's role is he's the leader of the team. He's the go-to clutch shooter of the team, but he's not like the top consistent scorer night in and night out. That's just not who he is, but that's okay for Rutgers because they have a bunch of other guys that are also capable of stepping up and filling that role when they need to.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. So Geo is proven, and he showed last night. You can say Northwestern all you want, but they needed the guy. He was the guy, and just the way he played in the second half put the team on his back. I think it was Caleb Acano said he hurt his back last night because he carried the team. And Geo has to be the guy down the road, and they were missing that. Like Illinois, he wasn't playing, and so he wasn't able to be the guy down the road. And he wasn't on the court against Maryland, and that showed. So I think that might be the major difference going into the rest of the year, and he's going to have to be in order for them to make the NCAA tournament and get a good seed, and hey, maybe even have a shot at going far in Big Ten tournament. People always get past that. Maybe they can make a run at it in Indy. So
yeah, and the thing with the Big Ten tournament, sorry to cut you off there.
No, good. Yeah, I had no thoughts. I really actually did.
Yeah, the thing about the Big Ten tournament is, Rutgers is still on the cusp. There's a realistic possibility they could finish with the top 4 seed. And in that case, they've got the double bye. They wouldn't even have to play in Chicago until Friday during the quarterfinals. And then, you can sort of talk yourself into, they only need a couple of bounces to go their way, a couple strong games in a neutral site. And, you could see Rutgers potentially playing for a Big Ten title. It's not likely. They're not favored to, but it's definitely within the realm of possibility, which it hasn't really been ever.
Hey, if Corey Sanders and them could will them to almost beating Purdue a couple years ago, I think I could see this team making some noise coming Indy. Sadly, that this Magic season it's not at the Garden. The year that Rutgers is really crazy because man, that crowd. If they could replicate that crowd against Michigan for like 2 or 3 games in the tournament, that would be the craziest home court advantage in all of conference tournaments. So, all right. So the obvious other big subject when it comes to Rutgers is the return of the Schiano man. So he's back. It's been, well, I guess it was early this summer, so it's been like about 2 months since he's come back. What is your overall feel about like the staff he's established and the recruits he's brought in so far? Like, is that a win per se?
Oh, it's definitely a win in 2 respects. One, he's bringing in a staff of, talented coaches, talented recruiters. You look at Fran Brown. He got him over from Temple. Temple was I don't want to say a powerhouse. They weren't competing for national titles, but they were a very good football team in the American Conference. And that's really in large part due to the recruiting impact that he had in the Philly area and the South Jersey area especially. But he's really taken the lead and been a top recruiter for the Scarlet Knights. And the other thing is, Rutgers finally has a budget, like a real Big Ten, Power 5 level budget for assistant coaches. It was always a case of, well, let's find this one guy that we can get for $1 million or not even $1 million, but get guys at a budget, get guys that maybe don't have the resume, but we can get them for the right price and maybe they turn into something. That's really been the defining aspect of the Rutgers athletic department. And now the checkbooks have sort of been open and they're saying, all right, get who you need to get, do what you need to do to make this team competitive in the Big Ten. So I think that willingness to spend and the willingness to invest in not only Schiano, but to let Schiano then invest in his assistants is going to pay dividends for this program down the road. Another thing to really point out is, Rutgers was ranked around 100 in the recruiting rankings for this incoming class. After Schiano got there, he had 3 weeks to really flip recruits and, get a couple transfers, and he was able to get them up to like the mid-lower 60s in the country, which isn't great for a Big Ten school, but compared to where they were a month before they hired him, I think that's absolutely a best-case scenario so far for what Rutgers has done.
The old terminology is always, you can't always go home, and I think a lot of people, when they thought of the Greg Schiano hire coming back, was, of course, being here at Louisville, firsthand experience, is Bobby Petrino coming back and it not working out so well for U of L. But I feel like, and I think you could talk about this, it's really 2 different situations, because I viewed Louisville as a team at the time that could have hired the young up-and-comer and done something, because they were coming off a 12-1 season. They didn't need to go back to old ground. When it comes to Rutgers, they needed someone to reinvigorate the program, and he was shown so far he's always had the attitude, and he's always been able to recruit here. He left with a class that had never been seen before Rutgers, and of course hasn't ever been seen since. This is truly the case of the only hire they needed to make, wouldn't you say?
More or less. I mean, I kind of get a little wary when fans say there's only one coach that can ever fix a program, because if that's really the case, then your program's not going to last very long once that coach, retires. So I don't know if he was the only one, but he was the one that the fan base really wanted. He was the one that the donors really wanted. And ultimately, he wanted to come back. And that was the biggest factor, was the fact that he was willing to give it a second go, to really say, okay, Rutgers now is in the Big Ten. They're really struggling. It's going to be a project. It's going to be a build. But he saw the ceiling for Rutgers was, like Pat Hobbs said when he fired Chris Ash, I want to go to a Rose Bowl. And it could take a long time for us to get there. But at the same time, Schiano's the guy who says, all right, I've coached on national caliber teams in Ohio State. I know what it takes to win. I've got a much larger recruiting network now than I did when I left Rutgers in 2011. And now I have the resources, and I want to come back, and I want to build this team. So that was really how that all went down.
Yeah, I've spoken before when talking about the subject with on another podcast with my friend who runs this entire network. And I was going off about, yes, it's harder than it was in terms of maybe competition, but maybe not so much, because Schiano came in when it was world-beating Miami and Virginia Tech teams in the Big East, and he also had West Virginia, and he had to compete against Syracuse in recruiting. But but them in the Big Ten and what they've been able to get means that I think it's easier for recruits to come there. So do you think that maybe we are overreacting a little bit much? Because Rutgers had only two Division 1A at the time recruits that got recruited by another Division 1A school, basically, when he first came to Rutgers. And now I think the talent, there's just much more talent on this team than he had then, I would per se. So do you, in the end, think it is a harder gig to get them to the 6-1 mark in the Big Ten, or is that just a misconception than it was in the Big East at the time?
I think it's a little bit of a misconception. At the same, it's hard to say, because on the one hand, yes, there's way more talent, especially at the skill positions now, than there was in 2000 when Greg Schiano took over the first time. At the same time, the competition's also a bit stiffer. The Big East back then was no joke either, but the Big Ten's a conference where almost every team can, show up and play and beat almost everyone else. And then, of course, Ohio State's above the rest. But it's really, I don't know what the team is going to look like next year. I don't know how many games they're going to win. They could win 3 games. They could, he's gotten some impact transfers. He could theoretically win 6. It's not likely, but it's definitely within the realm of possibility. And I think it's really just a case of, what is this team going to look like in 3 years? Once you've established yourself as a respectable Big Ten school, you now have a unique pitch to all those New Jersey recruits to say, okay, you can go to a football factory and you can, sit on the bench for the first few years, and then maybe by the time you're a junior or senior, you can really be a key part of that team. Or you can come to Rutgers and, make an immediate impact right away. And if you develop the way we can get you to develop, 4 years from now, you'll have virtually a statue outside of SHI Stadium. You'll go down as one of the legends to ever play Rutgers football, whereas at an Ohio State or Michigan, you're just another cog in the machine.
It's going to be interesting. It's all about closing off closing the borders off, closing the Delaware, closing the Hudson, making sure these guys don't leave. And he's also been the guy to go down to Florida and, of course, get New Yorkers to come. Ray Rice from New Rochelle, right, a little bit just right north of the city. And so it's going to be up to him to get the recruits and maybe get some wins immediately. And so you said it really is a good thought. They could I think it's not the craziest thing that they can get 6 wins. And when looking at the schedule in terms of recruiting, I think the biggest games next year that I think we are, when we get to the football news cycle, everyone's going to start talking about is Temple and Syracuse. Would you also consider those like just the games that, in terms of the recruiting and early recruiting in the Schiano era, those games are must win next year, is to beat Temple and Syracuse?
Well, I think they're must win in terms of recruiting, and also in the terms of if you want to have a somewhat respectable record in year one. Those are 2 teams that, Temple's, they're an AAC team. They're solid, but they're not, world beaters by any means. Certainly Rutgers shouldn't look at them that way. And, Syracuse was coming off a big year, and they really struggled, and I don't think a lot of people expected them to. So both of those games are very intriguing opportunities for Rutgers to really make a statement and really say to the world of college football and to the recruits in the local area, hey, we're a legitimate Power 5 team. You should come and play for us.
And then from there you gotta. So I think the biggest goal, because I agree that the 4-year mark, like you got to get to the bowl game by 4 years. It showed that Chris Ash wasn't getting anywhere near that in year 4, and I've always said with college sports, it's the 4-year mark to get the 6 wins. But hey, I think in a couple years the goal I think has to be you got to beat the Illinois, you got to beat the Northwesterns. I think Maryland. Yeah, they did struggle. You got to be able to compete and beat Maryland because they got blown out by, I think it was, what did they have, 4 or 5 wins? I think Maryland, and they got blown out at home.
I want to say 4 wins off the top of my head, but Well, Maryland's another big game in terms of recruiting too, because they're right down I-95. It's like a 3-hour drive between New Brunswick and College Park. So that's another one that you could throw in there in terms of trying to win over the local recruits.
And do you think is the 4-year mark, like in terms of, yes, we all love to see it next year bowl or maybe even 2 years to see a bowl game, but is 4-year that magic maximum mark that they need to have 6 wins by, would you say?
Yeah, if you can't get 6 wins by year 4, when you have all of your guys, you begin to ask whether or not that coach can ever get 6 wins in the current, situation that Rutgers is in. But at the same time, I also think that that's not really going to be an issue for Greg Schiano, barring something unforeseen, like the injury bug hitting the team, or God forbid we have another major scandal off the field that Coach Ray doesn't have any control over. You look at what happened with the credit card scandal. That's what got a good part of the depth chart for the defense 2 years ago. So it's really going to be a challenge for Greg Schiano, but I think it's one that he's more than capable of taking on.
And all right, so I guess to close up the Schiano stuff, I guess to dive back into the first time around, do you have any favorite Schiano memories outside of, everyone knows the big Louisville game in 06, but do you have any times out at the stadium that are just your favorite memories that really invigorate you getting excited for the next season, the Schiano era?
I wasn't a huge Rutgers football fan the first time around because I was still, kind of growing up. But looking back on it, I would say, 2006 over Louisville was obviously, that takes the cake. But you also throw in 2 years later when Louisville came back to SHI Stadium and, Rutgers just beat them, I think it was 63-14. So that's been a very interesting rivalry. I'm trying not to rub salt into the wounds, but, it's just a case of, those teams were really fun to watch. They had a lot of talent. They had a lot of NFL players, especially on offense, and, they had the McCourty brothers and a few other guys on defense. But it really isn't too much of any one win that really stands out to me.
Fun fact for all those listening, if you want to find some WRSU calls, I think the biggest one on YouTube is them is that Louisville game in 08 where Rutgers drops 49 points in the first half and Mike Teal throws 6 touchdowns. And I think that little clip ends with, I think, frickin' Kenny Britt on defense just laying out someone. So if you want to catch some good student radio calls outside of their Twitter account where they post clips, go check out that Louisville game to see if Rutgers. So you see how Rutgers actually being good at football one time and how it could happen again. So I guess to close it out, final prediction, just I guess back to basketball. Where are you guys going to be calling a game from come the first week of March Madness? Your ridiculous or out there prediction. Where do you think you guys are going to be calling a game from?
I don't think I'll be calling that game just as a sophomore, but you mean location-wise?
Yeah, station-wise. Where do you think Rutgers is going to be?
Well, I'm going to be a little biased here. I was talking with Robert Baxter, the kid I'm going to be calling the NCAA wrestling championships in Minnesota with, and in terms of where they're going to play, I'm going to be biased to say Omaha just because that would really work out well for me. But there's also a scenario where Rutgers is a 7 seed, Seton Hall's a 2 seed. They're playing in Albany, and they'll have a chance. They meet in the second round, barring any upsets. Rutgers Seton Hall rematch, not far from both of those schools, with a chance to go to Madison Square Garden in the Sweet 16. So that would probably be the most interesting storyline.
And I guess since you brought up wrestling, and I can't believe I've ignored it, huge win against Ryder yesterday. I guess, how do you say Paganos or Panagos? He had the huge upset yesterday over number 6 wrestler in the country for his weight class. But actually, the main question I think we're going to end it on is the prediction that everyone always asks. Who's going to be the first Big Ten champion for Rutgers? And what do you say right now? Could it happen this year?
Could it happen this year? First Big Ten championship for Rutgers. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. I think the fact that it's not impossible is really a testament to how far this team has come. Let's not forget, 4 years ago, Rutgers their Ken Palm ranking was in the 250s.
Oh, no, sorry. I meant any team. Any team.
Oh, any team.
Any team.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just restart there. I would say probably it would have to be either, girls soccer, women's soccer came very close to that this year. They were in the semifinal. They had a chance. That game went to overtime. They lost to Michigan 2-1 in extra time. They had a chance to win a Big Ten title on their home turf. Yersack Field was the neutral site, if you want to put that in quotation marks. I think women's soccer, wrestling already has two individual championships, but they don't have a team title yet. And, I think men's lacrosse would be a prime candidate. That's a team that's always in the rankings, in the mix. They just haven't been able to get the job done. And that's a team that has the talent to do it. They've got some of the best attackers in college lacrosse, but it's a question of, can the defense, can the goaltending, can the face-offs all show up? I'm sorry to ramble about lacrosse here for a bit, but I think those two teams, women's soccer and men's lacrosse, are the two teams that are really in the best position to do it soon.
Hey, and knowing basketball and the way basketball works, sometimes the conference tournament, the wildest, hopefully I'm up in Indianapolis since I'm only 2 hours away in Louisville on that, I guess, Saturday or Sunday. I always forget when each tournament final is, watching them have a chance to do that. But, hey, it's a testament really to where the athletic department is at, that they have a decent amount of teams competing. And hopefully for football, they just have the chance to build up and maybe just catch up to, Ohio State's at the craziest level, when maybe they can catch up, become a perennial 8, 9, 10 win team. Hey, maybe they can be Ohio State. Let's be optimistic like crazy. Why not? So I got to say, thank you very much, Chris, for coming on board. I know we had a little bit of difficulty scheduling this. I had computer issues, for those that don't know the last time around. We had this planned out a couple of days before, but I got to say thank you very much, Chris, for coming on. You want to give a shout out to the socials? So you want to shout out the socials real quick?
Yeah, you can follow WRSU Sports at WRSU Sports. We have a pretty active Twitter presence. And we also, my personal Twitter is at Tsakonas_Chris. And those are really where you want to go to get all that Rutgers content. And
you can catch 88.7 WRSU on the TuneIn app, like I do for at this point in the year, all the basketball games are on BTN, and I'm able to catch them. But definitely give them a listen. Check out, students calling games. Sorry, I forget my age sometimes, because I remember I brought up the Schiano era. I forgot we're getting to the point where that's a little bit younger for us. So kind of lost track of everybody's ages. Even though I've only got 2 years on you, I forget how young I was when Schiano left. But yeah, you can definitely check out, support, if you're at Rutgers, listen to this, support your fellow students and check out WRSU. This has been episode 5 of the We're Young But Just Us podcast on the Sports Opinions Podcast Network of podcasts. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Music, and all the fun apps. Follow us at Sports Opinions 30. Follow me at KDoc_52 on Twitter. And stay tuned for the future. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. That was Chris Tsakonas from 88.7 WRSU FM. You can check them out. They're on the TuneIn app. And, of course, if you're in that Middlesex area of New Jersey, check them out on your dial. It was great to have them on. I'll always love to talk about Rutgers sports. It's always a fun experience to get into this year. And I hope they can do well. It's really a fun topic. Hope to have some great guests coming in the future, working on some comic creators and maybe some comic analysts. I haven't had a comic news person from comics. I had some sports news, but haven't had the comic news yet. And then we're going to work on that. And, always like to talk some nerd. Today was all sports. Maybe we can get all nerd one time and talk about that. So thank you again for listening, and have a great one.